and we are now going to introduce to you a very familiar face. Welcome back, Philip Beetlestone, Director, Water Cooperation and Diplomacy at SIWI. And you will bring together a little bit of what we've been talking about so far, and you will also bridge over to World Water Week theme, Bridging Borders. Philip, over to you.
Thank you very much. I hope I can do justice to the very sort of full weeks that you've had on the very broad topics as well. Let me share my screen. Great. Yes, so here we are on the last day of the Water and Communications workshop. My task has been to sort of look back a little bit, but look back at why is water critical for peace and a sustainable future. So what I'm going to do in the presentation is sort of revisit a presentation I had in the beginning of the workshop, looking at the interconnected nature of water, highlight what are the dividends of cooperation, of why do it, and then look at the idea of conflict, peace, and prosperity, how those are interlinked. And then finally come back to looking at what can you as a communicator influence and work on within these spaces. So going back to the beginning, I just wanted to take a quick series of slides to sort of outline the complexities of water and why it's important. As you're all aware, the SDGs for 2020-30 are coming up. But one thing that has to be recognized is that water underpins the majority of them. So in order to realize a lot of the SDGs, there is a factor of water, how it is governed and how it is managed and used comes into play. The other factor is that as we have the pressures of sort of population growth, climate change, etc., impacting us, if you look at the global risks for the next 10 years, a lot of, so 5 out of 10 of those, and the top 4, are related to water in some way or another, either too much, too little, too late. So that's another reason, more pressure on the resources itself. Another aspect we have is that, as you know, that I said that it was linked to the SDGs. But more fundamentally, the SDGs are a way of measuring and looking, sort of giving us direction. But more importantly, water underpins our societies as societies, our economies, and also the environment. So for example, it underpins tourism, trade, our food systems. It determines where we stay. We could migrate because there's not enough water or there's too much water. It also undermines our health. Again, it's, for example, if you look at the Aral Sea, with the drying up the Aral Basin, that has actually introduced health issues because of the toxic sands that are blowing up. But on top of all of that, we have the need for the water, but we are facing pressures, be it from desertification, the increasing water demand because population is increasing. Our weather patterns are now much more variable, and if we look at our news daily, you'll see flooding, droughts, fires. There's also a reduction in precipitation. In some areas, it's much more. In some areas, it's much less. We're also facing biodiversity loss and a few other things. So we need water. We need a lot of it to underpin our society, but it's facing pressures that we've not seen before. On top of that, on top of those pressures, the way that we view water as individuals or as individual groups is quite important because each person comes to water and water from their own value system and their own perceptions. This can be from, be it a politician, it's coming from power, it's from the economy, but then from a cultural, there's a spiritual aspect to it. There's also a cultural aspect to it. And there's also for the legacy. What do we leave behind for the future generations? So there's a sense of stewardship and responsibility. So all of these different values and perceptions come into how do we look at water and how do we interact with each other when it comes to water. The last bit is with what are the pressures on water? Water, again, as I noted, there's a climate change, climate variability, there's increased population, urbanization. We're using too much water than in certain areas we have. The environment is being degraded. The land use and land cover is changing, such as, for example, deforestation, or basically changes from a forest to a pasture. That actually affects the ecosystem, the hydrology as well of the system. making sure how much water we have in the system. Actually, you might have just as green a space, but it's not trees, it's grasslands. And that actually might have an effect on how much water you have in your system. So there's the physical pressures. I didn't go through all of them, but there are also the pressures of political. As we start feeling more pressure on water, individual states feel that we need whatever water we can to maintain our society, our economies, and our environment. Again, they're national priorities. There's also transboundary issues of a country might be upstream or downstream, as is the case, for example, if you look at the Nile Basin, in the upstream is Uganda, and the downstream is Egypt. And there are tensions there, but they have to work together. So there are lots of the political and these physical aspects on water that you can't underestimate. So what does that all mean with the pressures from political, physical, the perceptions, the need for the water? What comes out there is a simple fact, and that is we cannot address the water issues we are facing as humanity as an individual sovereign state. I just noted on the slide is not quite correct, but I'll correct that. Or as a community, thus we must cooperate and work collectively. This is what we need to do. But with the issues of sovereignty and as just human nature, when there's something scarce, we want to keep hold of it. Keep hold of it for ourselves as an individual, ourselves as a tribe, ourselves as a community, ourselves as a sovereign state, ourselves as a region. So how do we overcome that as humanity or as a region? And that's where the challenge comes, looking into the topic of peace and prosperity, because how do we bridge these sovereign ideas, personal ideas, to look out for the collective? And that's where the idea of benefit sharing comes in. This concept of benefit sharing we use very much in the transboundary water resources management sphere that's looking at water shared between two states. But the same principles are applicable between two communities, between two states, between two families. They're still the same principles. But essentially, we're trying to find a benefit, which is something that produces good and helpful for the results and promotes well-being, and to share, which is to partake, to experience, and to occupy with others. So it's to try and work together to maximize the benefit of a limited resource, in this case, water, that we have. So why should we do this? Again, it's a great concept, but why should we do it? Again, it's if I have the water within my sovereign state, I'm in an upstream basin in a water tower, why should I cooperate? I have what I need for my economy and my people. So with that thinking, it's very hard to move beyond solving our issues, but there are benefits to sharing, to benefit sharing in shared waters. I won't go through the text, but I just want to look at some of the key concepts. One, when you do benefit share and you work together to come up with work collectively, to collaborate and come up with joint solutions, it promotes peace and cooperation. And as a result, it works to enhance resource sustainability. Again, it's you're using the limited resources you have more effectively for a broader area. It fosters economic growth because you can find synergies between countries. One where, for example, in the highlands, it might not be productive to grow wheat, but in the lowlands, it might be in another country. So how do you find those benefits? Also, it protects ecosystems because some might be more fragile in some areas and some not. So you work to see how you can work together to find those. And overall, as society and as humans, it improves the resilience of working together because we more effectively use a resource and we more effectively protect our environment. And also we can buffer ourselves against natural disasters. With all the benefits that one has, there are other challenges, which are the barriers to people generally don't want to share. These barriers to shared water cooperation are sovereignty and politics. There's a lack of trust. There's history, power dynamics. there's what we call elite capture, where a group of individuals or an individual has taken control of the water and is not letting it have access to others. But they are catalysts that actually we can start to move away from these very siloed and very isolationist views that can work towards cooperation. That is, if there is a political will to do this within the government, if trust is developed, if you can find a common problem that can be shared and solved together. If there's a crisis, crises are wonderful. They're terrible things, but they're also wonderful for cooperation because they act as a focal point so we can work on a common problem and work on a common understanding. I just want to show a few pictures going forward here. What these are this is important because these are boundaries between states, between countries. But what you note is that the way that the land is being used on either side of these borders is drastically different. And by these differences, it has a great impact on the water availability, the amount of water used, and the efficiency of the water, and also the environment and the ecosystems around. For example, I'll just take the image of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. For example, if you get precipitation on the Haitian side of the border, which is very denuded, there is a potential that runoff will pick up sediment and it'll run right off, and then the water will not be retained within the system and run out to sea, leaving no water for humanity, for society, economy, or the environment. On the Dominican Republic side, if that same water fell, because of the structure of the catchment and the health of the catchment, that water potentially can be retained within the system longer to be used by the environment, by society, for prosperity. So it's extremely important. But what these differences create is a concept that I'll go into now, which is looking at what we call the curve of conflict. This goes into when we talk about peace and security towards peace and prosperity. At the bottom, you'll see that peace, life is stable, life is good, it's routine diplomacy. But as in the case of water, as a resource gets scarcer and there is more need, tension starts to build. This starts to go towards conflict. What we mean by conflict here is in the true sense of the word, where it's a disagreement. And conflict, we do not mean armed conflict. That we classify as war. And if this situation is not addressed and cannot be addressed through cooperation, you go into a stage of war, and then you go into a cycle of peace building, peace enforcement, peacekeeping, and then you start to come down off the curve and go into reconciliation. Why this is important is because when you talk about peace, security, and prosperity, that only takes place when you're below that black line, actually in the area where it says peace, the blue area. It does happen a little bit above that, but that's the area that we're working with, where we talk about peace, security, and prosperity. So the question is, how do we get into that place? How do we maintain that so we don't go into this tension and don't go into these conflicts beyond that? Conflict, peace, and security, prosperity is a continuum. It's always a state of ebb and flow all over the world because the weather changes, the political situation changes, and that is a dynamic. But overall, conflict is a situation where people or groups and countries are involved in serious disagreement. We don't want to be that. And then peace is the next step, which we talked about, is that blue area, where it's the absence of conflict. And this is important, absence of conflict, violence. And what that does, it enables societies to thrive because they can focus not just on the conflict or those needs of the conflict, but actually on sort of that security, which is the next level, which is the protection of individuals and communities from threats, whether physical, economic, or environmental. And that's a place where we want to be, because when we have climate crises, be it floods, droughts, etc., if we have structures in place to be able to buffer those uncertainties, we are able to remain in a state of peace and security, which in the long term leads to prosperity. Which, again, prosperity being the ability for people, communities to thrive, the economic well-being and quality of life. So we really want to be in that peace, prosperity. But as I said, This is dynamic. It changes country to country, year to year, and it's a problem that is not solved one-off. So how do we address this within the water environment? We go into, there's of course what happens on the ground within each individual country regarding the water resources governance and management within a country, but there are activities which take place from the concept of diplomacy. What I'm showing here is when people think of diplomacy, they think of diplomacy, which is what we call track 1 on the top, where you see that is between two governments. But there are other types of diplomacy, which are diplomacy between professionals. There's between businesses, private citizens. There's religious aspects of it. There are types of activism as well. But if you look at this graph, what is in the center of this is public opinion and communications. Because public opinion and the communications, the way that we communicate, actually underpins diplomacy. It can actually steer it one way or the other. It can influence it positively or negatively. So at the role as yourselves as communicators, you are empowered to influence these processes, which are from a community level to actually geopolitical level with what you write and how you write it. What this leads to is where 3 concepts I want to put forward, which I'm sure you're all aware of. But when writing stories or reporting on ideas, it's very important to consider the facts of what are the facts. Because it's within the sphere of water, water is very close to humans and they take it very seriously, especially sovereign states. But the idea of disinformation is it's very easy to go there. And what disinformation is, the intentional deceitful information that seeks to erode trust. I'll just leave it at that. You can read the rest. And I think that's in a situation where we have many, many different media outlets, etc. The media space that we live in is very open towards disinformation and how it influences the news and the processes that we are engaged in. Then there's misinformation where, for example, I might have misinformation in my presentation because I unknowingly mislead you because, for example, I might have put a title underneath a picture that is actually not applicable. That's a very simplistic one. So it's misinformation. It's not meant, but it does happen and it does impact. But most important, it's not intentional as disinformation. And then there is the third one, which is information influencing, which different types of media activities are aimed at specific groups to change a behavior or influence a decision. And that's also a power that one has as a communicator. Again, I have just a few minutes left, almost to the end of my presentation, but let me just go to here. This is a title of, this is a news article that's very recent. A water war is looming between Mexico and the US. Neither side will win. I have issues with it. Firstly, war. When we talk about water and war, water is actually, if you look into history, water is more of a catalyst for cooperation than it is for armed conflict. Because war can be defined as a state of armed conflict between different countries and different groups within a country. So the term of water war, I think, is very misleading and actually it's very sensational, which is great, the stories, but actually it's not doing justice to the cause of water cooperation. But if you looked into this story, what it is about is a 1944 water treaty between the US and Mexico. It is facing a lot of, this water in the Rio Grande is facing a lot of pressures and there's not enough water. Mexico is not able to provide the water that has been requested to provide within the treaty. But if you look at when the treaty was written, the years of 1920, again, that was 1944. In the years of 1920, in the 1930s, 1920s, there were periods of high precipitation. So when they made the estimations of how much water that Mexico should provide at this point in time, was actually based on excessively high years of water potentially. In addition, they had population growth and increased demand because of the North American Free Trade Agreement along both sides of the border. So there was this increase of demand, which was not seen. And then, of course, we put climate change on top of that. So for me, that's the biggest story, not the war. Because my question would be, should this not say a water conflict is looming between Mexico and the US? Should the 1944 water treaty be revisited? Because that would be something more about a question about cooperation and how do we get through this instead of building tensions. So how you write is very important, and how you use the words is quite important. So what can you do as a communicator? As I said, you can be a disruptor. You can be a disruptor in a positive way to disrupt the status quo. If there's, for example, the political elite has captured water, you can be a disruptor, but you can also be a disruptor to destabilize diplomacy process and help instill conflict. You can be a catalyst, bringing people together, ideas together. You can inform. You can also educate, because the topic of water, everyone's close to it, but again, there's lots of nuances to it of how it plays out within society. You can also act as a stabilizer. You can be a champion for what cause you have within your community. Also, I think most important is within water, water is the underrepresented or the most vulnerable are usually left out of discourses. They're just not at the table, which was evident in the conversations and the presentations that we've had over the last week. So again, you are the voice of underrepresented. Key takeaways would be the topic of water is inexorably linked to water sovereignty. People are very sensitive when it comes to water. I've been accosted by armed farmers when going to read a water level when I was early in my career, because they thought that well belonged to them, which it didn't. But again, they are very, very sensitive when it comes to water. You do not need to change the world. You can make a difference within your community, work within your context, and only take on risks that you are willing to accept. For example, if you work in the space of awareness, that's fairly low risk. But as you start to go towards investigative journalism, that risk is higher. Again, can risk, again, potential imprisonment, potential death. So take on the risk that you are willing to accept. And finally, remember, water is a human story. It underpins our history. If you look back through the Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent, and also will be integral to our future going forward. So thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you within the Water Week there. But I leave you with two references. One is the Water for Prosperity and Peace, which is a UN Water Development Report, which is a very good reference. And likewise, the Battle for Truth on Water in Climate and Environment, which is about information influencing campaigns. Thank you very much. I apologize for going over a few minutes. Thank you.
Not to worry at all. Thank you, Philip. Thank you very, very much. We do have a question for you from Jane. Is that the first question? So how do the riparian states determine the equitable sharing?
That is that is actually a very tenuous, it's a point of, put it this way, it's a point of tension, whereas pushing apart cooperation because there's disagreement between the two groups of actually what is in the basement, what is in the catchment. So how much, the agreement on how much water is there. But that also can act, as we see in many cases, that's actually the point of reference where you can work together with the different groups to build a common understanding of actually what is in the basin. And based on that common understanding, you can determine what is that allocation. And that's where with the river basin authorities that we work with through time, this is a process that actually takes years. It's not a one-off because there's agreement of what data is there, what methodologies you even use in accounting for that water, or how much water is in the system. So it's very important that that can be used as a catalyst to work towards cooperation and peace between two member states. When we go back into history with the allocations of water, they were based on available data at that point in time, be it 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years, maybe 100 years ago. But those values are coming into question because of the climate pressures we're facing. So we're having to reopen those, as was done in the Colorado River Basin over the past 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Philip? Just type them in the chat. I can also see here that Marissa has written that she's actually writing about the water cooperation between Mexico and the US as we're speaking.
Perfect.
So that's nice. We got another message here. But Tima says, as border areas are inherently rural, how important is the role of rural populations and their access to water in current decision-making processes around water?
You bring up a very good point here, which is communities like this, smaller communities, rural communities, also usually marginalized in sense from an economic perspective, are usually not at the table. So one thing that SIWI and a lot of the organizations working in this space is, how do you bring these voices to the table and give them that voice? That could be indigenous people, women, youth, disabled, underrepresented, whatever that group may be. And I see that is one of the roles as a communicator, is to bring those voices to that table. Because you understanding the sphere that is going on from a global or regional or national perspective, it gives you power to bring that, to raise that voice. And I think it's an underheard voice and does need to be brought to the table. And that, as SIWI, is one thing that we try to do. Thank you.
Thank you. And do you know offhand if there will be any sessions or discussions like this about these issues at World Water Week?
We are having some sessions on shared transboundary, shared waters. There's also issues regarding indigenous people and their influence on water governance and also water management. Again, as you might be aware, about 25% of the global landmass is in the hands of indigenous peoples. But they are usually not at the table when it comes to these dialogues. They also sit at the headwaters of a lot of catchments, but they're not at the table. So we have a very large indigenous contingent, I should say, coming to the Water Week that will put these perspectives forward. One of the way that they manage their water, which is very different than a Western approach. It's more based on stewardship, but it's also how can that type of thinking come into Western thinking when we face these crises. And also there's other aspects when you talk about source to sea of how the activities on land upstream affect downstream and into the ocean, of how they impact, for example, fisheries and the quality of the oceans and seas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we are looking forward to hearing more about that. Jane has another question here. Are there instances where diplomacy is actually accommodating each other to avoid escalation into conflict?
It's not my area of expertise in sense of conflict and mapping conflicts historically. But I will say this, in this, again, working in Southern Africa for a lot of my career, if you look at the basin agreements that are in place within the Southern African developed community, be it between Kunene-Kuvalai, I think the Popo, the Buzi, these agreements were actually put in place during conflict between the two countries. So even in times of conflict, water acts as a catalyst and an avenue for diplomacy and discourse when all avenues have failed, because there is that basic need. So I see it's more of a catalyst for peace and entry point than to actually take apart. Again, I'm sorry I can't speak on the exact question, because but IHE has done some studying work on that. So if you go to IHE Delft's website, you can find out more about that and on the mapping of conflict as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And we don't expect you to be expert in all areas.
Thank you.
We are looking forward to hearing more on these issues at World Water Week. I'd like to ask you, just one last question. What are your expectations on the week, and what are you looking forward to the most?
For me, the Water Week, I think through time, we're bringing a very interesting group together. It's no longer just water people talking to water people. We now have, there's business, there underrepresented groups that are having a loud voice. And so it's bringing these different groups from communities as well to governments that are coming together to look at this problem that we're having. Because the realization is, there is a general realization that we cannot solve these problems alone. We have to work in partnership to do this. And that's what I'm interested in seeing is, how do we, at the Water Week, is moving towards solutions than just presenting problems, which we're very good at, but I'm looking for that solutions. And I feel that the communicators that you have here, that is another group that is coming to the table, which has another aspect and another power to this dialogue, and that is gaining momentum and the realization of the power that holds. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip. Thank you very much for coming to Water and Communications once again. We hope to see more of you during the Water Week in Stockholm, online or on site, however you are all connecting. It's now time to introduce the next speaker of today. And we have with us Oliver Haye, Head of Policy and Campaigns Global Action Plan. Oliver, hello, how are you?
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks very much for having me.
Great. Where are you connecting from, Oliver?
I'm from St Albans, which is a town just outside London in the UK.
Fantastic. You were not here when we just opened the meeting, so I'd just like to tell you or let you know that we have people connecting from Uganda, Kazakhstan, Scotland, Germany, the UK, Tanzania, Italy, Cabo Verde, Botswana, and China. That's what I captured in the chat, and more places. So we are very happy to have everyone here. And this is our second session on AI. And you are going to talk about AI threats to climate change and what journalists and communicators must know. So over to you.
Yes, well, thank you very much for having me, and hello everyone. It's great to be here. I'm Oliver Haye from Global Action Plan in the UK, and we're a member of Climate Action Against Disinformation, which is CAD for short, an international coalition of groups focusing on fossil fuel industry disinformation and big tech's role in amplifying and monetizing disinformation, and more broadly, eviscerating the integrity of our information ecosystems. Global Action Plan mobilizes people against the systems that harm us and the planet. And for the past 4 years, we've been focusing on the big tech surveillance for profit business model as one of the most important systems generating bad outcomes for people and planet. And this mission is shared by CAD and its members. So over the last year, we've turned our attention to artificial intelligence for 2 reasons. First, our prediction is that AI policy will rapidly subsume most other tech policy. And so the main policies we've been demanding for the last few years from social media and advertising companies, namely safety, transparency, and accountability, all need to be applied to the AI industry. The second reason is that the AI industry has, from its very first moments, been selling the idea that AI will save the planet. And when we dig into that argument, we have found quite the reverse. People talk about AI for good. What we are seeing, first and foremost, is AI for bad. So as an example of some of the kind of big talk that we've seen, Microsoft at the last climate change meeting in Dubai said, AI and data tools will allow nations to measure emissions far better than they can today. Google DeepMind staff say advances in artificial general intelligence research will supercharge society's ability to tackle and manage climate change. The Bezos Earth Fund, Jeff Bezos of Amazon, announces $100 million for AI solutions to tackle climate change and nature loss, and calls for innovative solutions as part of its AI for Climate and Nature Grand Challenge. And then, of course, there's Sam Altman, the chief evangelist for AI, who says, I think this will be the most tremendous leap forward in quality of life for people that we've had. AI might do any one of these things, but what are the first things we've seen being done with this technology and by these companies? We produced a short report earlier this year to look at the most current data and trends, and we found 3 things. First, AI is causing massive increases in energy and water use today. Second, the first and more widespread users of AI have been the fossil fuel industry. And third, AI is deeply threatening the information ecosystems, which virtually guarantees that climate disinformation will get worse. So first, we're seeing a dramatic rise in energy and water use from the expansion of data centers. This is unsurprising. As many people have documented, AI searches can take up to 10 times the computational power of traditional Google search or other search engines. And each successive large language model is being trained on exponentially larger amounts of data. The AI industry is deeply embracing the idea of scalability, that we need to create larger and larger models. And this is why you see such concentration in the industry, and the costs of training models go from the hundreds of thousands of dollars to now billions in just 2 to 3 years. And partly due to this demand, America, for the first time in 20 years, is seeing its overall energy consumption go up. The growth of data centers has been a driving force behind these alarming trends. Here in the UK, we are in the final few weeks of a snap election, and a recent manifesto for the Labour Party, who are widely expected to form the next government in 10 days' time, talks of the need to reform planning laws in order to get on with building data centres. Politically, in the UK at least, AI is seen as an engine of economic growth, and any concerns about energy and resource use are ignored. But what even this is missing is that AI can be used by ExxonMobil and other fossil fuel companies to increase production of fossil fuels. That is definitely not AI saving the planet. Indeed, Microsoft's first and largest AI customers were the fossil fuel industry, sparking something of an internal backlash, as reported by Grist, among some of its more idealistic engineers. And third, back to CAD and Global Action Plan's core issue, AI is threatening the information ecosystem in which climate disinformation is thriving. Elon Musk's X platform didn't need AI to become a hellscape, but it has certainly got worse because of it. And now Google search is being cannibalized by its own AI. So what are the most popular arguments Silicon Valley is making about why AI could save the planet? There's about 5 that we've seen, 5 arguments that we've seen. And the first interesting thing about this list is that only one of these is actually about stalling climate change. The last 4 are simply documenting the end of the world, not preventing it. So efficiency is a big claim we've seen. Tackling extreme weather, climate change modeling, monitoring species decline, and monitoring the implementation of the Paris Agreement. So let's take the first of those, efficiency. Even within that field, we must question the men of Silicon Valley, and they almost all are men, who say the good will outweigh the bad. Google claims that AI has improved data center efficiency by 20%. And that's a very good thing. We all want efficiency like that. But what we most have to care about is the overall energy use. And what we can see is that data centers are set to triple in the next 6 years. So I admit I'm no mathematician, but even I can do this calculation. If you start with 100 units of energy, reduced by 20% is 80 units, which are then tripled by data center growth, resulting in 240 units of energy. It's crude for sure, but you get the point. The big picture is the problem that they are distracting us from. So combine AI for Exxon with AI for energy increases, and the bad is currently today outweighing the good. Next, let's look at the information ecosystem. It is really hard to count how many ways this problem has been on full display in just the last few months. First, the good parts. There is some hope that machine learning systems could help fight climate disinformation. And indeed, CAD has partnered with John Cook at the Monash University in the States to use his CARDS system to help us detect climate disinformation. But that's the only bright light, really, certainly recently. Four unfortunate events tell the stories of the current destruction. First is Google's AI search debacle, where AI searchers have told people to eat rocks and put glue in their pizza. I'm sure you've all seen this doing the rounds. But even worse is the stories of how the search engine optimization industry has been using AI to do SEO heists, copying legitimate news sites and stealing all their traffic, threatening an already strained news publishing industry. Second, you'll see how Sam Altman, OpenAI's boss, asked Scarlett Johansson to use their voice, and then after she turned them down, proceeded to use it, or a striking likeness of it, as the voice of ChatGPT anyway. He's since apologized, but that says so much about whether we should trust the chief evangelists here. Not only are they embracing the dystopia of the movie Her, in which Scarlett Johansson starred, they are creating something much worse, where control is in the hands of a few billionaire men and none are held to account. Next, we saw earlier this year how Stability AI's image generator was responsible for non-consensual porn of Taylor Swift being created on Reddit and spread throughout Twitter. As well as megastars, this has been happening to countless women without the profile to fight back. Lest we forget about the original Russian disinformation campaigns, OpenAI and Meta revealed recently that Russia has a program called Doppelganger that is currently using OpenAI to generate disinformation around elections around the world. That is a lot of destabilizing forces at once, and the next 12 to 18 months are likely to see a fundamental transformation of the open web as we know it. So the question that guides our campaigns is the question of power and equity. Who controls AI? Who benefits from it? Who is harmed by it? Who has access to it? Who knows what it does? Who is held accountable if something goes wrong? Now, I have to pause on this idea of regulating AI because opponents say cliches like, it will stifle innovation. But what we are demanding of the AI industry and big tech in general is what every other industry, certainly in North America and Europe, which I'm more familiar with, has always been subject to. If you put your parents put you in a baby seat, well, that's because the manufacturers of that baby seat claimed it was safe and had been forced to prove it was safe. Perhaps a batch of chicken contains salmonella. We have systems of transparency to link that back to the processing center. And if a plane malfunctions and goes down, the company is held accountable to the families. Safety, transparency, accountability. It's the basis of our economy. But what do we see for big tech? Not a single piece of meaningful regulation in the US, where these companies are headquartered, since the 1990s, when they created a rule called Section 230, which protects companies from liability. Meanwhile, the industry is moving along at light speed, and people like Sam Altman, who on one hand promise everything will work out, are doing incredibly shady things with the other hand. One of his many projects is called WorldCoin, where They are literally paying people on low incomes in Kenya for eyeball scans to build a global crypto database, or his project to expand the nuclear industry in order to feed data center needs, or his project to raise $6 trillion to build more chips, again, to feed the AI machine, all as though it were a foregone conclusion. Let's look at two other classic promises from Silicon Valley that it will save the planet. Uber promised to reduce carbon emissions with ride sharing, taking cars off the street. But what the Massachusetts Institute for Technology found was quite the opposite. It added more single-use riders. But of course, that PR cycle was in the rearview mirror by then. And then, of course, there is Mark Zuckerberg's promise to bring the world together over social media. Ripping the world apart is more accurately what it did. And it's worth mentioning how directly causal this one case is, because the social media report on the January the 6th committee was actually struck from the record. That report, which is available nonetheless, showed that it was Facebook's move to turn off all safety systems directly after the November the 4th election, when Biden won, that led to the organizing for the attack on the Capitol in its private groups. Obviously, there are a dozen other harms that Meta has conducted, including genocide in Myanmar, inciting sectarian violence in many other places of the world, and not least, Mark Zuckerberg lying to Congress under oath that he had not seen his company's own research on teen girls' depression rates relating to Instagram. So the too long, don't read version is they can't be trusted. They need what every industry gets: requirements regarding safety, transparency, and accountability. So the big picture question I'll leave you with when we think of AI in our black and white terms of good or bad is more nuanced. It's how will AI be implemented, when, and for whom? Who will control AI? These companies need what every industry gets: safety, transparency, and accountability. And our first simple ask is transparency from AI companies. The data is all there at the flip of a switch, as we find out from the many whistleblowers from Meta and Microsoft. Transparency on the energy and water use and the spread of disinformation or other harms to the information ecosystem. Maybe Google should explain why it's recommending pizza glue, and along the way explain how they will prevent this from happening before their next product gets released. Transparency is the first step to ensure safety. And if things go south, that CEOs are held accountable for their secrets and lies. So on behalf of our global coalition of more than 40 civil society groups, thank you very much for listening.
You're on mute.
I should now put on my microphone so you can also hear me. Thank you very much for coming to the program. If you have any questions from the audience about AI and this presentation, please write them in the chat. I'd like to ask you, Oliver, you mentioned the report that you wrote. You mentioned it in the beginning, a report on this. What have the reactions been?
Well, it's garnered quite a lot of attention because I think basically AI is such a kind of buzzword at the moment that the moment you start talking about AI, people tend to pick it up. When I say people, I mean, in this case, you know, the media. So we've had a lot of media interest, particularly in the US. And I think it's also been well received because there has been such an effort from the AI industry to hold up potential climate benefits as one of the kind of main reasons for pursuing AI at breakneck speed. So really, I think it's, you know, potential health breakthroughs and potential climate breakthroughs that have been put at the forefront of the PR effort by the industry, and have been used to say to regulators, you know, don't get in the way of what we're trying to do here, because if you do, you're going to put at risk climate action and you're going to put at risk health breakthroughs. So I think, to be honest, it's been received as quite a welcome collation of the research which is out there. And to be clear, we didn't do much, if any, primary research. We were collating and bringing together a lot of disparate bits of research that look at, you know, specific facts around energy use, water use, and then more nuanced stuff around the disinformation landscape. So yeah, I think it's welcome, and I think we will see more of this. I think we'll see more of climate being held up as the poster child of AI. But I want to, you know, stress the point that was in one of my earlier slides, that actually when you dig into these claims, most of them are about just monitoring and sort of tracking how the world is burning rather than doing anything about it. You know, the reason that the deforestation is happening is not because we don't have brilliant AI tools that can tell us exactly where it's happening and at what speed and you know, where it's newly happening. These are political problems. These are problems of power and politics, and AI is not interested in addressing those. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say on that question.
Thank you. Well, we have another question from Robert here. And no doubt you raised important issues here, but from a more mundane perspective, how should we be using AI in terms of our day-to-day work as communications people?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And certainly in our sector in the UK, the charity sector, I know that organizations are using AI tools to help them, for instance, better write newsletters to their members or summarize policy reports. I think, you know, as long as you're looking at these things as what they are, which is tools, new tools that can potentially add insight or potentially save a bit of time, that's fine. And as long as you're continuing to use your kind of human skepticism and faculties in assessing whether what they're coming up with is any good. I mean, for instance, a colleague of mine the other day asked ChatGPT what the outcome of the UK election was. This is a UK election which hasn't happened yet. And it gave him a fulsome response and a fulsome analysis of why the outcome had been what it had been. So, you know, these tools, which will inevitably get better, but they're, you know, they're not perfect, and a lot of them are actually not that sophisticated. It's text generation, text prediction, really, in many cases. So I guess in answer to your question, you know, if there's a problem that needs fixing and you think a certain AI tool can fix that problem, then I don't see why using it would be a problem, would be a bad thing rather. But I think kind of leaping towards AI because everyone else is, when it might be a solution in search of a problem, is probably less of a good way to go.
All right, thank you. As we are mainly water communicators and water journalists on board this program, there is very little talked about or in the debate about the requirements for AI in terms of energy and the water usage that you raised. Why do you think we hear so little about that?
I'm not sure why we hear so little about it. I mean, the facts are kind of relatively unsurprising in that, you know, we know that even 10 years ago, which is the last time we have decent figures for this, the data centers in the US were using 1.4 billion liters of water every day, and that was 10 years ago. And we know that there have been many times as many data centers built in that time, and now with AI, more are being procured. And the other thing to say is that a lot of these data centers are being built in areas of high water stress already, so exacerbating existing problems around water scarcity and drought. I don't know why there's not as much attention on it. I think probably because of the sort of dazzle of AI and you know, the shiny thing of a new technology is outshining the rather mundane kind of needs of where are you going to get this energy from? How's it going to be produced? What's not going to be provided with energy because of it? How are you going to get this water? Where is water not going to go? Who is going to be affected? And as well as water scarcity, we do also see that the data centers are often overlapping with areas of deprivation, areas of low income, and that's the kind of story with environmental justice wholesale. Really, infrastructure is often placed in places where people are less equipped to meet their basic needs, and that's one of the greatest injustices of the environmental agenda.
Right. Thank you. Marissa says, Oliver, is there any water footprint of this industry?
I'll share our report, which contains the research that we've got. Like I say, some of it is not particularly current, so I think more research is probably needed. I mean, it is also a relatively young industry, and the infrastructure that's being built to support it is not necessarily only for AI, so it's difficult to kind of strip it out. But yeah, I'll happily share the link to the report, and in there you'll find it's full of footnotes with the relevant references.
Thank you. I think that will also probably answer Batima's question here. Where can we find the data on water consumption of the data centers you have mentioned? That will then probably be
that's
same.
all in our report.
That's the report, and you will post the link. Super.
I'll post that link,
Macarena says here, another collateral impact of AI is how investors are prioritizing investing in these new technologies instead of putting more money into climate solutions. And this is an interesting report by Bloomberg Green today. And do we have the link to that one, Macarena? Can you post the link to the report?
Yeah. I'll share the link, Girl.
Okay, thank you. And Seifumi has also posted a link. Interesting here. Karen has a question, and that will probably be the last question of the day for you, Oliver. Are there examples of countries which are taking stronger approaches to regulating these data centers and specifically water/energy uses?
If there are, I'm not aware of them, which is almost certainly just because I'm not aware of them rather than they don't exist at all. I mean, that said, the tech industry and the infrastructure that supplies it has faced scant regulation in any of its facets. So I wouldn't be surprised if the answer to that is no, but I can't say for certain that I have the full picture on certainly on the global outlook.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We do have time for one more question from Juhita here. Interesting remarks from Elon Musk during the opening of World Water Forums last May that solar energy, solar panels could solve energy problems. Do you think this is feasible in today's case?
Well, I mean, solar and wind in particular are absolutely critical renewable technologies and are increasing in the capacity that's being deployed exponentially. And that's pretty consistent in most regions of the world. China is leading the world. But yeah, obviously it needs to go hand in hand with a number of things. The first is a concerted effort to increase energy efficiency and reduce demand. We can't, whilst it is true that globally the amount of renewable capacity is increasing massively, so too is energy demand, not least because of what's being placed on it by tech and AI. And so we can't just build our way out of that problem. We do also have to reduce energy demand. But also we need to see a massive increase in storage to go alongside that. Again, that is happening, and there are some strong indicators that actually renewables growth is now pretty much unstoppable and starting to genuinely eat into fossil fuel capacity. But we are clearly seeing fossil fuel capacity going up as well. I'm not sure if that question was more related to water, but I don't know.
Thank you. We see if Juhita gives a remark here. If so, I might post that to you and you could maybe just send us a clarification in writing if there was something else that you wanted to ask there, if anything's outstanding. I would like to thank you for coming to Water and Communications. Thank you so much for your presentation. And it's now time to introduce our next couple of speakers. Macarena Aguilar from Small World Stories is joined by Rachel Winks, also Small World Stories. Welcome to the both of you. And where are you connecting from?
I'm connecting from Spain. Hi, everyone.
I'm connecting from close to Oxford in England.
All right, welcome to the program. And your session is called Climate Communication Trends and Best Practices. Keep a finger on the pulse, and over to you.
Thanks a lot, Girl, for allowing us to join this amazing series of workshops. So my colleague and I would like to take you today through a tour of a resources hub that is filled with climate communications gems, which we hope you'll find useful in your day-to-day work. Before we do that, just a few words about Small World Stories. We are a very small creative organization. We help nonprofits and UN entities use communications strategically to showcase their work, to reach their program goals. We also produce audiovisual content, mostly from Asia and the Pacific, for the international arm of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. The services we offer to organizations are wide-ranging, as you can see here, but storytelling is at the heart of every project we undertake. As I am sure you will recognize this image, this is Australia's 2019-2020 Black Summer, which was particularly devastating in New South Wales, the region where part of Small World Stories is located. Like thousands of people, our co-director Lisa, who couldn't join us today because of the time difference, had to leave her home for days, not really knowing whether she was going to be able to return. This summer became incredibly stressful for us, an incredibly sad period for the organization. We actually refer to it as the trigger moment because it literally brought climate change home. But we were also shocked over the months of these terrible bushfires by the noise that emerged on social media and by some of the media coverage, which in Australia particularly, which not only failed to bring people together, it sort of interfered with the response, but it created a lot of confusion and division in a country which is already quite polarized in questions related to climate change. And at that point, we as an organization made the decision to invest a lot more of our time and our resources on projects and organizations dedicated to tackling the climate crisis. We started supporting major industrial decarbonization projects in places like Sri Lanka, Ghana, Morocco, and globally through the work that we do with the UN agency dedicated to industrial development. And through our ABC stories, we started exploring climate solutions in places like the Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, Fiji, East Timor, and much more. We also spent a fair bit of time researching and holding conversations with climate communications experts and journalists to try and unpack and understand better the challenges and opportunities in this space. We actually put together a mini podcast series with those conversations. But during this period of sort of soul searching almost, we also realized that many people with all kinds of backgrounds have already been grappling with these questions for a long time. We found an incredible body of knowledge around climate communications, but we also felt it was often scattered and not so easy to find. So again, we decided to invest in collecting and sharing the best and most recent resources out there. And that's how the Climate Communications Resources Hub that we're sharing with you today was born. The idea behind it, or the intention, was to help, form an army of super skilled climate communicators and journalists like yourselves, ready to flip the script and ready to inspire way more people to act. But now, before we get into the heart of the Resources Hub, we would love to hear from you. And Cécile is going to put on the screen 3 poll-style questions, and we would love you to respond to them really, really quickly and let us know what your responses are. And one of the things we love the most about the Hub is that there's literally something for everyone. We organize the resources by types of content, such as academic papers, reports, media articles, talks, webinars, podcast, books, and much more. And the logic is that we all have different preferences when consuming information. Some of us might be big into academic papers, while others may prefer reading about the findings in a media article. And to each of the resources, we assign themes that are linked to many of the issues involved in climate communications, including, as Oliver presented, misinformation and disinformation. Also, we have now in the Hub over 300 resources, but visitors can use one or a combination of filters to narrow their search and find what they're looking for, or just allow the Hub to surprise them with, a lot of the gems that are in it. To go it a bit deeper, we thought that the best way would be to simply, show you some examples that we think you might find useful. First things first, and it is a coincidence that the previous presentation was about disinformation, misinformation, and the use of AI. We also believe that to do a good job as journalists and as communicators, we need to stay very vigilant of climate mis and disinformation trends. Unfortunately, as we've heard, they're on the rise, and we need to learn to debunk them when we do our work. We also need to be able to identify the new forms of climate delay narratives, which are replacing the old climate denial discourses. So in the Hub, you will find some of the latest pieces of research, like you'll see on the top, like the new report from the Climate Action Against Disinformation Coalition, which you know a lot about now. But you will also find older foundational books like Merchants of Doubt by Naomi Oreskes, or Amy Westervelt's award-winning podcast, Drilled, which uncovers the strategies and actors behind these campaigns. Journalists in the call might be particularly interested in a course that AFP offers, a short course to learn how to verify content and claims about climate change. I recommend that you check it out. So these are the kinds of resources that you'll find in the Hub under the themes, cataloged under the themes of disinformation and or delay narratives. It's also important to, as communicators, to have some kind of understanding of the barriers or psychological blocks that have made it, and still do, so hard to inspire action at all levels. And again, here we find a wide range of resources, like a classical one that you might be familiar with is George Marshall's book, which delves into why our brains are wired to ignore climate change. But you will also enjoy the great talk by psychologist Per Stognes on how to transform apocalypse fatigue into action. We all know also how important it is to know our audiences, obviously, when we sharpen our communications work. And that's why the Hub has a section dedicated to collecting the latest research and studies looking into what the public thinks, knows, and wants in relation to climate change. In it, you will find some of the flagship research that you're probably familiar with, and audience segmentation by the Yale program on climate change communications. But you will also find the very latest, such as UNDP's survey, global survey, which was released last week. Some really interesting findings in it, like, they polled 75,000 people in 77 countries to find out that 80% of respondents want their governments to increase efforts to combat global warming, and that most everywhere concerns about climate change are rising, with 50% of respondents thinking about climate change at least once a week. Getting the framing, the tone, and the words right is also crucial in order to create messages and content that move people into action instead of turning them off. The Hub has many resources discussing this and the important questions of, balancing fear and hope narratives, which, is often highly discussed. And here I've only selected a few for you to see, but I really encourage you to explore many, many others that you can find under the themes. One of the most rewarding aspects of creating this Hub has been to discover the level of creativity that communicators are using to spread climate messages. All tactics are on the table, with an incredible rise in climate art, in climate fiction, in the use of comedy, and a lot more. Actually, increasingly, the entertainment industry is getting involved. And in fact, this week, the Hollywood Annual Climate Summit is taking place. And you can find out more about it in the Hub. I've also listed it here in this list of examples. But there are also, incredibly creative initiatives like the Climate Comedy Cohort, which is dedicated to helping comedians integrate in their shows climate change storylines. And also courses that are being offered at the moment, like the Picture the Change, which is listed here also, that target specifically performing artists and train them on the climate science. Of course, the role of media can't be stressed enough, and the Hub actually contains over 50 resources about this topic. At the top of this slide, you can see the very latest investigation by Internews on the state of climate change and environmental journalism. It came out earlier this month. Internews surveyed more than 700 journalists and editors across 100 countries. And most journalists agreed that the volume of reporting on climate change, especially in the context of extreme weather events, has increased, but also the challenges. And see, for example, the second example I've added to this slide is an article by The Guardian covering this report, this Internews report, and putting the spotlight on the finding that nearly half of the journalists covering the climate crisis received threats for their work. I also recommend, I've put it here, listening to the podcast Hot Take, which focuses entirely on journalism and climate change, and to check out initiatives like the Climate Change Now Journalism Awards or Oxford's Climate Change Journalism Network. So these are only a few examples, but as I say, there's a lot more. So we really encourage to go into the Hub and dig in and and look around, really. As I said, these are only examples, but before we move on to showing you other sections of the Hub, we would really love to hear from you again. And we have one question. We would like you to share in the chat box if you have any favorite climate fiction book or movie that you've read or that you've watched lately. Please add it to the chat, and so that we can sort of share and we can get some inspiration from each other. So I'll pause here for a little bit to let you think about it and write in the chat.
I think I'm going to kick off with the end we start from. I've just watched that one. It's really good. Very real. We've got The Ministry for the Future. Excellent book. Terrifying opening. Don't Look Up. And Waterworld. Okay, yeah. The Day After Tomorrow, that one often comes up. Don't Look Up, yeah. What's yours, Macarena?
The Ministry of the Future, I agree. It's quite something, particularly the first chapter.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. So what else you'll find in the hub? Rachel, I'll hand over to you to take us through the few next slides. Thank you.
Well, hi everyone. It's a pleasure to join you today. I hope you can hear me okay. Apparently my volume's a little low. I'm Rachel. So here you'll see a picture of the hub's climate calendar. We hope this will be a really useful tool for you. At the moment, we're mainly using it to raise awareness about climate action using social media. And you'll see if you flip each month card, there's a list of world days behind it. And of course, we've included obvious world days like Earth Day, but we think every day is Climate Action Day, climate change being such an intersectional issue. So we've taken days like International Friendship Day, World Seagrass Day, World Health Day, and shown how they can be connected to climate change and used to call for climate action. So for example, this week, watch out for this one, we have World Industrial Design Day, and we'll be connecting this to sustainable industrial design principles like industrial decarbonisation and energy efficiency. I'd encourage you to have a look at the calendar and use it for inspiration for social media, especially if you're a social media manager and you're looking for content. We hope you'll find that really useful. And then the next page, we have the blog. I think Macarena is clearing. Thank you. And with the blog, when you have a look through it, you'll see that our main goal is to present a subject or a theme and then link it to climate communications resources located on the hub. So each blog takes the reader through a journey, on a little journey through a number of resources on the site. And we've covered a range of issues. So for example, which emotions inspire climate action? So that's very much the fear versus hope narrative. How climate comedy, climate literature, climate movies can help us to prompt climate action. How to address greenwashing, that's a really big issue. And then the latest blog looks at climate journalism, how to address issues that climate journalists face, as Macarena was saying, very tricky subjects, including dis and misinformation, even threats to journalists. We think it's really important not just to talk about the challenges around climate communications, and there are plenty, but also look at the solutions and then share the resources that really support those solutions. So in the latest climate journalism blog, we look at disinformation and misinformation and the threats that climate journalists face, but the resources in the blog also look at the solutions that are on offer, whether that's for journalists or people working in newsrooms or funding organisations. What can be done to help communicators do their job more effectively? What are the resources that they can use and how can they overcome those challenges? So please do take a look at the blog and use those posts to explore and navigate around the resources on the hub. Thank you. And I think Macarena is just going to wrap up with some questions.
Yeah. So what's next for the hub? I've actually forgot to mention at the beginning that we began this journey only a few months ago. So the hub has been up and running for only a few months. So, you know, we're sort of, you know, trying to, we're developing as we're speaking now. Our goal is to include resources in other languages, starting obviously with Spanish and French. We would like to introduce a new case studies section where we would like to feature examples of successful campaigns and communications project and successful communications projects. We're still figuring out how to source those. We would like to open the blog section that Rachel just spoke to you about to also external contributors. We would like to obviously put a lot more effort into outreach and into dissemination of the blog so that it reaches a lot more people like yourselves. So we extend our call for help. We obviously welcome your feedback. Once you've had a chance to explore the hub, you will see that there is a sharing option. So please share any resources that you will probably have and that are not in the hub still. Sign up to our newsletter. Contact us if you would like to write a guest blog. We really are very keen to start having contributors and experts like yourselves get involved. And lastly, we are looking for an intern to help us manage the blog. So if you know of anyone who is as passionate as we are about climate communications and who would like to join our team to help out on this project, please send them over to us. And that is it from our side. You've got our contact details here. Please do not hesitate to contact us. And I will stop here, girl, unshare my screen and
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. We have a few questions here in the chat.
Okay.
I will read the first one from Hillary. Thanks for the presentation and great work. How does this relate to existing knowledge platforms like CDKN and We Adapt? I read a paper that counted over 64 climate change knowledge sharing platforms back in 2014, and I think there's still many new ones and defunct ones. How are you avoiding duplicating efforts? That's the first part of the question. We can take that first.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much, Hillary. That's obviously a really, really good question. I don't think we are aware of these platforms, but we will check them out. And as far as we know, we're not duplicating efforts at the moment. We are collecting all the knowledge that is being generated and sharing it. We do liaise with other groups, other initiatives like Creatives for Climate Change and podcasters and other people that are working in this space to share their work and for them to amplify what we put on the platform. But thank you, because we will check out those other platforms.
Yes, thank you. And then the second part of the question, how are you ensuring sustainability of the platforms? I have stumbled across many defunct platforms that had great knowledge sharing ambitions, but the funding or the energy ran out. And have you also heard of the climate knowledge brokers? They did a lot of work around this.
Yeah, sustainability is definitely an issue, Hillary, and we're just devoting as many internal resources as we can to this work. So all of us at Small World Stories are basically chipping in. So far, it's worked well. But we are, that one of the reasons we're looking for an intern, and in the future we probably will have to devote dedicated resources to it. We hope that we won't run out of steam, as you say, but we can't be 100% sure.
I should point out that Macarena has even been looking at sustainability of the platform itself. So Macarena is interested in working on a platform with green credentials, so green software development, and that's something that she's been looking at too.
I'm going to throw up.
Thank you. We have a request.
I'm looking down too long.
Sorry, we have a question. If you could please share the email page again. And we shall also send out the emails when we're sending out the recordings, then to make sure if anyone who didn't take note or didn't have pen and paper will get your emails. But maybe we share that email page once more. And while doing so, Haye has some questions. Is the bias for Western Hemisphere and Euro-settled societies and mindsets?
No, what we have found, and it's one of the issues that we want to tackle, is that indeed a lot of the resources that you'll find currently in the hub are very Western created. And yes, indeed, that is an issue that we want to address, and that's also one of the reasons we are opening up and we want to have content created in other languages. There is a lot of content that is being created in Latin America, and that I am following that very closely. So definitely that's content that we will bring in. And also South Asia is also a place where we're very involved with climate communicators, and we're also are looking into bringing a lot more content and best practice, particularly not so much the knowledge part, but the best practices part. I think that once we start collecting case studies and looking into, campaigns and communications projects that have been successful, we will definitely bring that knowledge from a much wider geographical space.
Thank you very much. Let's see, no more questions in the chat. Then I will say thank you to Rachel and Macarena. We will, as I said, post your emails and contacts and all the links that's been in the chat. I will send them when I'm sending the recording so that everyone will get everything. And it's actually time for me to introduce to you for the last speaker of the day, but also the last speaker of this workshop. John Meyer, are you with us? Yes. Hello, how are you?
Hi, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, I guess. Good morning from the Western United States. I'm John Meyer, and I'm at the University of Washington College of the Environment in Seattle. And I'm joining you today to share with you all some content that we teach and train and share with our scientists here at the University of Washington and beyond, particularly around science communication and using storytelling techniques so that their messages can land a bit better. So like I said, my name is John Meyer. I'm the Senior Director for Marketing and Communications at the University of Washington College of the Environment. We're located here in Seattle, Washington, in the very Pacific Northwest, left-hand side of the continental United States. If you haven't been here, I invite you. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous place. I'm very fortunate to live here. We've got big forests, big mountains, big ocean, big rivers, all of it. And it's just a beautiful place to especially be working with scientists that are immersed in environment and environmental issues. College of the Environment is the largest environment-focused college, place of higher learning in the United States. We do about anywhere between $125 to $175 million in research per year as a college. So pretty remarkable spot. So because we do so much research, we've invested in some science communication training skills for our scientists. We have over 1,000 scientists, including about 225 faculty members that are all actively doing research anywhere from the poles to outer space to the bottom of the ocean and everything in between. So today, I was invited to share with you some of our science communication techniques that we use to train our scientists. Specifically, today I'm going to be talking about storytelling and how we encourage our scientists to think about incorporating storytelling techniques into their work when they're communicating with the broader public. And quite frankly, when they're communicating with others that are in their own field, other scientists as well. So with that, let's kick it off. Okay, great. So why are we, and I just want to acknowledge really quickly too, that I know many of you are communicators yourselves, you're journalists, you might be communicating for a lab. This is a lot of information that is geared towards scientists, but we hope that you might find it helpful and useful for your own work, but also to even pass on to the scientists and in the science realms that you work in. So anyway, just wanted to caveat that. So why are we talking about science storytelling anyway? Well, science has impact. We encourage our scientists constantly to get out of the lab and share their work because the environment is front and center for people now more than ever. And science and the research that is happening at a place like the College of the Environment really helps people make decisions and solve problems. It informs people's way of life. It helps us make sense of our world. And science voices are really, really important and play a critical role in sort of the broader dialogue that's happening in society. And storytelling can be a vehicle for science and science communication. I think we have seen over the years that a sort of just the facts approach won't work. Many scientists continue to this day, I think, to sort of, use this approach. They see sort of a gap in knowledge. They've got all the facts that help answer those questions, and they want to just sort of dispel those facts on folks. And we see time and time again that that just doesn't sink in. So we're thinking about other ways, of course, where scientists can have more of an effect and where their messages can land. And that's where science storytelling comes in. So why might storytelling be an appropriate vehicle? Well, again, we've seen that blurring the facts that people just doesn't work. It's crystal clear, for instance, that the ocean might be warming in, say, one instance. But, to a lot of folks, that just doesn't mean anything. And why should it even matter? Again, storytelling can help us land why these things are important. So when we talk about science storytelling and just storytelling in general, what is it that we're talking about? What are we trying to sort of capitalize on? Well, if you think about good storytelling, this is something that grabs people's attention. Utilizing story techniques can be a very powerful tool. Good stories tend to appeal to our humanity. They tap into our emotions, and they create a connection that can keep listeners engaged. We want to introduce you to some key elements of storytelling and how we might consider some of these best practices in good science story to make good science stories memorable and relatable. So, key elements of storytelling include a few things. Good stories capture the imagination. Good stories tend to talk about discovery and unexpected findings. Good stories are told at the right time. They're timely. Good stories often have some of those storytelling elements like tension and drama. They've got sort of character-driven narratives. Good storytelling is relatable to the listener or to the reader or to the viewer. And good stories tend to follow a narrative arc, which I'll get into each one of these things a little bit more as we go on. So these are some sort of concepts that we look for when we're talking with our scientists about how they might communicate their work. Sometimes all of these things won't make it into how you talk about your research, but often they do. At least a handful of them do, and they can make your work that much more memorable. Okay, so let's start by going through each one of these things. So thinking about good stories that capture the imagination. So, the day-to-day for many scientists, may seem routine or like a chore for many of us. And by the way, I'm a former scientist. I am a marine ecologist that has done research up and down the US West Coast and in the northeastern portion of the US East Coast, studying nearshore environments. So day to day for us scientists, may seem routine, may seem just like the norm, may seem just like we're going to work. And it may be frustrating. We might be working with uncooperative study organisms, or we might be in the field in the middle of the night, or we might be, spending our entire summer out at sea or on a research vessel. But that is totally out of the ordinary for most people, the way that we spend our days, the way that scientists get to spend their days. And so helping transport our listener to the places that we go for our research, both visually and verbally, can help capture their attention and their imagination. What's it like to be on the high seas for a month at a time? What does it feel like to deploy a robot on the ocean floor? How did you react to that bear that you stumbled across in the wilderness when you were trying to get to the river that you were doing research on? What animals do you see when you first deploy your camera trap? Things like this. These are all out of the ordinary for most folks. So take people along on the adventure with you, and you'll have them hooked and wanting more. Okay, so the next idea is good stories tend to share discovery and unexpected findings. So the excitement of a breakthrough discovery or results that change how we think about an issue not only thrills scientists, but other audiences as well. So conveying our enthusiasm about discovery and how we thought the world worked one way, but turns out it works another way, taps into people's sort of curiosity about the unknown, sort of classic storytelling element. That we have so much to learn about our universe and that scientists are utilizing ever-evolving tools to understand that universe can spark imagination and wonder in your audience. So really lean into the discovery aspect, the mystery aspect of science that really can get people's attention. Timeliness. Why now? Why are we talking about whatever topic it might be now? So does your research relate to a particular issue that's on people's minds? Tapping into that will help people remember why your work matters and just remember your work, plain and simple. It's important to tell those at the right time. So for example, out here in the Western United States, we've got lots of folks that look at the impacts of wildfires. But talking about wildfires maybe in the dead of winter can seem inconsequential to people. They've got other things on their mind, like how much snowfall is happening in the mountains, or why is this season seeming to be wetter than other seasons? But if you talk about wildfire work in the spring or summer, as people are gearing up to get back outside again, or get into the forest, or when the smoke from a massive fire is blowing into town and it's very visible, that's when it's on people's mind. That's when our research can immediately connect with something that people are thinking about, and it will capture their interest. So really think about the timing for when you're telling your stories or trying to get your message out there. People love some drama, don't they? So is there any tension or drama in your research that you can sort of pull out and share with people? And this can look like all kinds of things. Did you face certain obstacles in your research? Did you ever wonder if you would, cross the finish line and publish your results? Would you ever get to that finish line? Were there bad actors or faceless institutions that were standing in your way? How did you overcome them? Highlighting these moments of tension or drama can grab people's imagination as they wonder if the protagonist, you, will prevail and how you will prevail. Talking about what you overcame to complete your work is a classic storytelling technique that has kept audiences on the edges of their seats for ages. So see if you can tap into some of that tension and drama and see if you can pull out some of those characters that played a role in that tension and drama. It all brings this much more to life. Much more relatable. Speaking of relatable, when talking about your work, scientists really need to think about how does this relate to me? So much of what scientists study, what we do, say at the College of the Environment, can seem hard to connect to people's daily lives. So why should a random member of the public care if, say, an invasive clam species is taking up space, on the shorelines here just outside of Seattle? That is, by the way, what I used to study. Thinking about my research or their research from my audience's perspective can help frame it in a way that is important in terms that they can connect to. So people might care about that invasive clam species if it diminishes their ability to go out and enjoy fresh local seafood, or if it wreaks havoc on the local environment, a beach ecosystem that they may know and love. So if there's a personal connection to it, people are going to pay attention to it more. So think about what that relationship might be. And lastly, in terms of storytelling elements, does your message in the story you're trying to tell follow a narrative arc? So narrative arc simply refers to the structure and shape of a story. It describes its progression from the beginning where all seems normal. So this is kind of the exposition. This is like, the foundation of your story. It's the beginning. All seems normal, to the middle where something changes and there is rising tension and there is conflict, perhaps at the climax where some of that is perhaps resolved. Then there is sort of falling action towards a resolution. And once you get to the resolution, the world has changed somehow. So can your research, can what it is that you're trying to put out in the world follow any sort of storytelling narrative arc that is, kind of a tried and true method for things to really connect with folks? So using some of those elements, you can piece together a narrative that will keep your audience engaged and invested in the outcome. Now, it's important to be thinking about all those elements that make a story sort of sing. Again, not all of those elements will plug into what you're trying to do or what you're trying to say, but some will. But equally as important as thinking about what those storytelling elements are, it's very important to identify what success looks like for you. Why are you telling your story in the first place? And we reinforce this a lot with our scientists because we find that they're getting better at this, but still, sometimes it is unclear why they want to communicate about their work in the first place. So we always reinforce a few key things with them. First, define your goal. What are you trying to achieve? Know your audience. Who's the audience that you need to connect with to achieve that goal? And then from there, you can craft your message or your story that will connect with that audience, right? So why are you sharing your work in the first place? What is your goal? Are you trying to attract new funding? Are you trying to assist in sort of political or policy decision-making? Are you trying to start a new business? I mean, think about all the new sort of, carbon dioxide removal businesses that are popping up all over the place. Scientists are getting tapped to play a role in that more than they ever have before. Are you trying to build new relationships with a community that you never have before? Trying to solve a particular problem, change behavior, or, even if your goal is just to increase people's appreciation of science, that's a good goal. You should name it. So be very clear about what you're trying to do when you are getting out there to communicate about your work. Now, of course, when you're out there communicating about your work, there has to be an audience to receive that communication or be in dialogue with about that communication. So we encourage everybody to, of course, think about the audience that they're connecting with. This can be the institution, this can be the individual, a community, whoever. And you've got your message. You need to put yourself in their shoes to be thinking about what it is that they care about. So if you're talking about your research to, say, legislators, people making laws, they're going to be thinking about, is this important to my constituency? Do the voters even care about this? How much is this going to cost, both in terms of political capital and financial capital, to get this done? So you need to put yourself in their shoes and kind of frame your work and walk through those questions. Nonprofit organizations, they're out there and they exist because they have a particular agenda that they're trying to achieve. They're going to want to know, where does your work fit into this agenda? And you need to be able to articulate that in your storytelling and what you share with them. Other scientists, you might be trying to build relationships with them as well. They'll be thinking about, is what you're saying, is it true? Is it robust? Do they believe it? How does it affect and elevate their own work? The media will be thinking about, if this is news, will it sell? Will this increase subscriptions? Will this help maintain my credibility as a journalist if I report on these things? Thinking through all of this is critically important. Essentially, everyone is thinking about, why does this matter to me? And lastly, when we talk about engaging with audiences, whether it's storytelling or any other sort of dialogue, we really encourage our scientists to move sort of from this deficit model where scientists, know everything. They've got the answers to whatever issue it might be. And, the community that they're communicating with is just sort of this empty vessel waiting to be filled up. At the College of the Environment, sometimes we call this the loading dock model, where we've got all the science, we're just going to put it on this loading dock. You can back your truck up in to the loading dock and take as much of it away as you want. Time and time again, we have found that this doesn't work, and that an engagement model, more of a two-way street, is much more effective. So really connecting with that community, understanding what their concerns are, what their values are, problems they're trying to solve, is much more effective at then framing your science in a way that will land with that community and be more useful. Like I said, this is an old slide and this is kind of an older concept, but time and time again, we still run into the fact that scientists are often approaching a lot of their communications with the sort of deficit model mindset. So we tend to reinforce this in any sort of talk that we give. It's getting better, but this is still there. And lastly, I'll just leave you with what we always encourage our scientists to do, which is to practice, practice, practice. Hone your stories, try them out on friends and colleagues, build the relationships you need in order for your message to stick. No one is a pro at this the first time they get out and share their work, especially with a new community or maybe in new ways. So don't be afraid to keep working on it. It's also very rare that just once connecting with a particular group is going to get you to the results that you want. So you've got to practice, you've got to get better, you've got to maintain those relationships, and you've got to continue reinforcing those messages. So I will stop there. Let's see, stop share. And I'm going to pop a, let's see. How am I going to do this? Well, I have a story that I'll pop a link in the chat at the end here that basically sums up a lot of what we just talked about, some of the science storytelling techniques. I know the slides will be shared as well, but this story will give you some of the content that sort of supports those slides. So thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much for all those tips and tools and very good things to have in mind when we are trying to write science communication ourselves or approach scientists to try and do it in a way that's more approachable.
Yeah.
If any one of you have questions, as always, just write them in the chat. And while you're doing so, I would like to ask you, I mean, often I've been approached by scientists, or when they read a text that I've written, they say like, oh, no, we must speak about this text because you can't publish it that way. It's written. And I then maybe go through the text with them and they can't find any actual faults. But at the end, they say, but it sounds so simple.
Yeah.
And that they are afraid of being, I don't know how to put it, simplified. How do you approach a scientist or any other professional who comes to you with such an argument?
Yeah, we see this all the time. And, often it's a negotiation where we end up landing. We might include, sometimes they come with great thoughts that we have missed. So we include those pieces. But, we often go back to like, what's the goal here? Why are we writing this piece? Why are we producing this video in the first place? And usually when we start there, it becomes more apparent why we wrote the story the way that we did, or why we chose to highlight the parts of that story that we did, or the parts of their research that we did. We often frame our work too as we're never going to be able to tell the entire story. And what we're trying to do is invite people to ask more questions and learn more about your research. So often, scientists want to lead with all the data, all the facts, all the information. And that is a perfect recipe to lose people and to, you know, essentially invite them to not ask more questions. The goal is to get them to ask more questions and to get closer to us. So usually, usually they can see that, and we can land at a good spot where they can see that the goal is being served in the way that we have written the piece. We encourage people to then be ready. Once the questions come, be ready to dive into the details and talk about sort of the nitty-gritty of your science, and be ready to go where your audience wants to go. But we've had some success there. I will tell you, over the past decade of doing this kind of work, decade plus now, that used to be much, much harder to have those conversations. And I think now, after years of sort of science in some ways not being taken seriously in the broader public, I think scientists are now even seeing themselves that they have to sort of change their approach and how they communicate science. And they're kind of willing to try new things. At least we've seen that in our field, which is great.
Right, thank you. Anna here from Grundfos, an encouraging note. Great stuff. Many of the researchers we fund could really learn something from it.
Oh,
yes,
cool. Great.
so we should really spread the word, John.
Yeah.
Another thing sometimes that you were talking about the audience and the importance of actually choosing your audience or identifying your audience. That's another thing that I often hear when you ask someone, so who is this for? Who do you want to communicate? Who should learn? And the answer I get back, oh, everyone, the broader public.
Yeah.
And so what do I do as a communicator?
Yeah, so it's funny because the evolution of our own training. So I started with, so almost any of our trainings start with three things, or have three elements in them: defining your goal, audience, and then your message. And we used to just really focus on starting with your audience and then the message that will resonate with them. But time and time again, we were running into exactly what you're talking about. We would say, well, who you're trying to connect with? Well, everybody. And so, that's the best way for your message not to resonate with folks, as if it's for everybody. So we really encourage people to think more deeply about what they're trying to achieve. They might not quite know the audience yet that they're trying to connect with, but they might know what they're trying to achieve by communicating their work. And in some cases, it's like, well, my work is just really cool, and I think other people are going to think it's cool too. That's fine, but let's name that, and then we can figure out the appropriate outlets for your work. Other times it's, I have real frustration over, a bill that just passed the U.S. House of Representatives that is going to set us back, 50 years when it comes to, some environmental sort of progress that we've done. Okay, now we know your audience is, you want those people that made that decision to understand why this was, perhaps a bad idea. And we can sort of gear our talking points and our messaging towards those policymakers so that they understand and can use their venue to sort of right that wrong.
Right, thank you. We have then a question from Meyer. Just a comment. No, sorry. The question was, there we go. It was from Amandeep. Sorry. What is the best communication format to present these stories? And is there an ideal length?
Yeah, so I talked about three things that we tend to talk about in all of our trainings. Well, this last year we've added a fourth, and it gets to this question, which is thinking about the format for your story. So if you're trying to connect with, say, for instance, a lot of the work that we do where I sit is we're trying to get students to come to our college. Well, writing a long think piece about research might not be the way to connect with students. Instead, having a great social media campaign where we highlight very quickly in 10-second videos the kinds of research that happens at the College of the Environment and the research that they can be part of is the venue for that sort of that sort of thing. So you really, again, have to ask yourself what you're trying to achieve, who the audience is that you're connecting with, and then take your cues from that. That will help dictate the sort of length. That will help dictate if this is a piece that you should publish as an op-ed in a newspaper, or if this is something that you should design a whole social media campaign around. So it really depends on what you're trying to achieve and the audience you're trying to connect with.
Thank you. I see that our time is running out. I would like to thank you so much for joining us here. Even though it's very early for you, I know, but we are very grateful that you took your time and taught us all these new insights. Thank you. And I think it's an excellent way of rounding up this workshop, Water in Communications.
Great.
But we're not quite finished. I'd like to remind everyone that the registration for World Water Week is open online or on site, whichever platform you like. And I would also like to ask you, Cecile has already posted in the chat, and we will also send it out, to fill in the evaluation form, the evaluation survey. It helps us to improve the program, and it's much appreciated. I also think that we have Anne online. Anne, are you there? From Grundfos.
Yes, I am. Hello, everyone. My name is Anne. I work at the Grundfos Foundation, and I'm based in Denmark and responsible for our communications. And I've been working with Jørgen on putting together the program, and I'm also the link into our philanthropic team. So please give us all your feedback so we can continue this program in the future as well, together with SIWI.
Thank you, Anne. And thanks for the Grundfos Foundation again for making this happen. The survey, as said, World Water Week, certificates for those of you who have attended live or recordings, more than 75% of all the sessions. We will send out certificates, and I will send you information about that in an email in just a few days. And I think that's it. I think it's now just left for me to say thank you. Thanks to all of you who have attended. Thanks to our interpreters, to Cecile, and again to Grundfos Foundation. Thank you very much from Water in Communications 2024.